Charlotte finished her first novel before Emily and Anne had made a good start on their own. That first novel, not much read today, is titled The Professor. Why, Charlotte thought, shouldn't she send it out to see if it could be published before the other two were finished? She indeed sent it out. It came back rejected. She sent it out again, rejected. She sent it out again and again and again. She quickly accumulated 5 rejection slips, and then she sent it out for a 6th try. Actually, The Professor is not a poor novel. One possible reason it was rejected so quickly by so many publishers is that Charlotte, though brilliant, was very provincial. She knew nothing of the publishing world. Believe it or not, when she would get the rejected manuscript back, she was in such a hurry to send it out to the next publisher that she never took off the rejection slips. By the time she sent it to the 6th publisher, he had to wade through 5 rejection slips before he could even read it. Of course, he too rejected it, but this became the turning point for Charlotte Brontë because although the 6th publisher, a man named Smith, rejected it, he wrote a personal note to Charlotte, which said, "If you ever write another novel, please send it to us first." This is hardly high praise, but to Charlotte Brontë, this unattractive girl from the moors who had never been encouraged by anyone, it was enough to fire her creative energy. At this point, it became imperative for the Reverend Mr. Brontë to go to Manchester to have an operation on his cataracts, and he indeed needed one of his children to go with him to serve as a nurse while he recovered. Charlotte, as the eldest, was the obvious choice. Think for a moment about the horrors of that particular operation in 1847. Anesthesia had not yet been developed. After the surgery, Charlotte had no time by day for anything but nursing Mr. Brontë. But at night, when Mr. Bronte's pain was so severe he was given morphine to sedate him, Charlotte could turn from her father's hospital bed to the little windowsill of the small window in the hospital room. She propped her journal against it and began to write the first chapters of the immortal Jane Eyre. Upon returning from the hospital, Charlotte was so quick, so inspired that she finished the second novel at about the same time Emily and Anne were finishing their first novel. It was decided to send Jane Eyre to Mr. Smith, and we know what happened next. The manuscript arrived at Mr. Smith's office on a Monday morning at about 8:30 a.m. He had no appointment until 9 o'clock, so he decided to begin reading Jane Eyre. At 10 minutes to 9, he stepped into the antechamber of his office and told his secretary to cancel all appointments for the day. "I'm reading a manuscript that is so superb it will make our name as publisher of great fiction." And he was absolutely correct. From the day he read the manuscript right down through today, Jane Eyre has always been successful. It was a bestseller for years in Charlotte Bronte's age, and even today it is always at the top of classic novels that are sold to school children and to the general public. Smith informed Charlotte that his firm would publish her novel. In his letters, he asked what name she intended to use. What man's name? Charlotte, in her naivete, didn't understand. Her name was Charlotte Brontë. That was what should be used. Smith responded that, of course, they couldn't use the name Charlotte Brontë. There had never been a respectable novel by a woman. Hundreds of women used male pseudonyms in the 19th century to get published, but not Charlotte Brontë. She let Mr. Smith know that she was not going to become a man to publish this book, but she cleverly solved the dilemma and maintained her integrity. "I won't change my name to a man's," she said. "Change my last name from Brontë to Bell and make my first name Currer. I want to be Currer Bell." Bell was a common name in the Haworth area. The publisher wondered why Currer, and Charlotte told him the obvious, because the name Currer is neither a man's name or a woman's name. It could be either. And when Emily's novel was published, it was under the name Ellis Bell. Anne's novels were by Acton Bell. Charlotte's compromise suited them all. Jane Eyre was as popular as the publisher hoped it would be. You would think there would have been rejoicing in Haworth, but there was not. At this point, Branwell re-enters the Brontë story. Branwell, who had the potential to do anything, be anything, had finally decided on the 2 passions he would devote his life to: alcohol and drugs. He literally drank and drugged himself to death in Haworth as his family looked helplessly on. Just weeks before Jane Eyre was published, Branwell wasted away, the victim of a dissipation. At Branwell's funeral, for reasons understood only by herself, Emily decided to honor the memory of her brother by going barefoot to the cemetery. There was a terrible storm that day. The temperature dropped 30 degrees. Emily, shortly after Branwell's funeral, contracted a violent cold. The cold became consumption, tuberculosis, and within 4 months, Emily was dying. Her Wuthering Heights was published while she was still alive. As glowing as the reviews were for Charlotte's Jane Eyre, that is how devastatingly negative the reviews were for Emily's novel. The critics hated it. They called it a work of immoral and amoral writer. They loathed the Heathcliff-Cathy relationship, failing to grasp the spirituality of the pair's doomed love. All they could see were all the deaths, the wretchedness, and the sadistic tortures that Heathcliff enacted to possess Cathy. Emily, on her deathbed, insisted on reading every review, and Charlotte tells us Emily read with a smile on her face as though she knew that someday her creation would be appreciated. Not until the 20th century did the critical tide turn and Wuthering Heights became known as a great novel. Within 6 months of Bramwell's death, Emily was dead, and then another blow. Anne fell prey to consumption as well immediately after Emily's death. The doctor told Charlotte the only thing that could save Anne was sea air, so Charlotte traveled with Anne to the seaside resort of Scarborough. Anne sank quickly in a rooming house full of holiday makers. Charlotte watched her last sibling die. She buried Anne there at Scarborough and returned alone and desolate to Haworth. She had lost her brother and her 2 sisters within 13 months of the publication of Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, and Anne's novel Agnes Grey. How dark and gloomy Haworth had now seemed to Charlotte, and although Mr. Brontë and his last remaining child suffered deeply, this tragedy hardly brought them closer together. One evening after father and daughter had sat quietly in the parlor, when both were ready to go upstairs to their separate bedrooms, they met at the bottom of the stairs. Mr. Brontë looked at Charlotte, shook his head, and said, "And you were the runt of the litter and weren't supposed to survive childhood." How did Charlotte survive? She fought her sorrows by writing 2 more novels. Her novel Shirley is not particularly worthwhile, but the other, the rather autobiographical Villette, is excellent. And then out of nowhere, the unexpected happens. Charlotte, at age 38, received a proposal of marriage. Her suitor was Arthur Bell Nichols, the curate for Mr. Brontë. Mr. Brontë at this point in life was extremely antisocial, but if there was one man he absolutely could not tolerate, it was his curate. What did Charlotte think of Arthur Bell Nichols? We know because of her journals. Not only did she not love him, she didn't even like him. She thought he was pretentious, stuffy, and dull. Her father, of course, would absolutely forbid any such marriage. Yet when Arthur Bell Nichols begged Charlotte to marry him, Charlotte, after some soul-searching, accepted. Although she had no love for him, to be married to this man would at least give her the life that perhaps the newness, the warmth that she had craved for. But unless her father withdrew his objection, there was no way she could marry Arthur Bell Nichols. Charlotte spent over a year insisting to her father that he allow her to marry this man. Finally, Mr. Brontë gave in. He told her he would not attend the marriage. "If you want to ruin your life and marry Arthur Bell Nichols, I will no longer stand in the way." So Charlotte married Mr. Nichols. They honeymooned in Ireland, and Charlotte's estimation of Mr. Nichols altered completely. Charlotte, to her great joy, discovered that not only was Mr. Nichols incredibly intelligent, not only did he have the same sense of humor as she, not only was he interested in nature in the same way as she was, but also he treated her like a queen. Finally, she had met someone who loved her for who she was. As Charlotte said, she could not have invented a hero for one of her novels who would be more perfect than the heroine than her lovely Arthur was for her. Shortly after the honeymoon, Charlotte became pregnant. The 2 things that she had wanted most in life, a husband to love and a child, were granted her almost immediately. She found out she was pregnant in September. She learned she had consumption in December. She was dead in March. The child, 7 months inside her, died as well. On the last day of her life, pathetically weakened, she opened her eyes on her deathbed and saw her beloved husband standing over her with a grieving expression. She smiled and whispered, "Do not worry, Arthur. God cannot possibly part us now because we are so happy." They were her last words. None of the Brontes' offspring lived past the age of 39. Today, Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights is regarded as perhaps the greatest novel in the English language. Many British and American critics say it is better than Jane Eyre, but as far as I am concerned, it is Charlotte, not Emily, whom we should admire the most of these 2 sisters. It was Charlotte, a homely woman from the bleak moors, who by publishing Jane Eyre gave us the first best-selling novel written by a woman. Her personal story is as romantic and inspiring as anything she could ever have conceived of writing in her fiction. That's from the book A Dab of Dickens and a Touch of Twain by Elliot Engel. This is a beautiful collection of anecdotal biographical sketches that I highly recommend.